Yu-Gi-Oh has been around for over a decade and has released a ton of cards throughout the years. Some of these cards are great, some not so much, and some are right in between. Let's go on an adventure to the unknown side of Yu-Gi-Oh and find some of the more unique cards in the game. Today's episode, we're going to be talking about counterparts, or at least two archetypes of monsters that have tons of counterparts. The first group of cards in today's episode are the Charmers, and although we've touched on the members of the archetype in previous episodes, but continuing with this episode, we're going to be talking about each Charmer and their companions as they evolve throughout their journeys. And instead of talking about each one individually, we're going to talk about each stage, as the Charmers all go through the same stages. But first, a breakdown of what the Charmers are. The archetype consists of 6 Charmers and their companions. Each Charmer is based on one of the 6 main attributes of Yu-Gi-Oh! There's Dark, the Dark Charmer, Asa, the Earth Charmer, Hita, the Fire Charmer, Lina, the Light Charmer, Arya, the Water Charmer, and Rin, the Wind Charmer. The Charmers at this stage are all level 3, have the same stat line of 500 attack points and 1500 defense, and all have the same effect. When flip face up, you take control of one monster your opponent controls of the corresponding attribute of the Charmer while the Charmer is on the field. And that's the theme with the Charmer archetype, that they can influence other monsters with the same attribute as them. Each of the Charmers have a familiar that, as they get stronger, the familiar also grows with them and shares their powers. All of the familiars, at least in their base forms, are incredibly weak monsters, being all level 3 or lower normal monsters, and except for one case, all with less than 1000 attack and defense. Petite Dragon, Rim's familiar, is the strongest stat-wise of the lot, with 600 attack and 700 defense, just to show how weak they are. However, Hita the Fire Charmer's Fox familiar is unique in that it's the only familiar with an effect, which is that during the end phase, if Foxfire was destroyed by battle and sent to the graveyard, you can special summon it from the graveyard. However, with the caveat that Foxfire can't be used as a tribute summon. So let's just briefly go over each of the Charmer's familiars. Dark has Metabat, Hita has Firefox as previously mentioned, Lina has Happy Lover, Arena has Gigabyte, Rin has Petite Dragon, and Asa has one of the most uniquely named cards in all of Yu-Gi-Oh!, Archfiend Marmot of Nefariousness. As the Charmers continue to develop their powers and abilities, both themselves and their familiars grow stronger. The first stage of this growth is the second form of the familiars. However, not all of the Charmers' familiars had the same growth. Not all of the Charmers' familiars have different forms. Although there isn't a canonical reason for this, it's more just Dark and Lina were released later on after the 4 original Charmers. So if you don't see evolutions or stronger forms of Dark or Lina while the others do, that's why. But let's get back on track. So the familiars now have a second form. Foxfire becomes Inari Fire, Gigabyte becomes Gigabyte, Petite Dragon becomes Ranru, and Archfiend Marmot of Nefarious becomes an even more complicated name, becoming Nefarious Archfiend Eater of Nefariousness. From there, it's only fair that the Charmers level up as well, becoming their familiar possessed forms. The Charmers channel the power of the familiar into themselves and power up. All of the Charmers in this form are level 4. They all have the same stat line of 1850 attack and 1500 defense, and can be special summoned from the hand or deck by sending the Charmer and a monster of the same attribute to the graveyard. When summoned this way, the familiar possessed monsters also gain piercing damage to their attacks. But in all honesty, it's a pretty rare case where you'd want piercing damage on a monster with less than 2000 attack. It's also worth noting that both Dark and Lina have an additional effect as they were released later. Lina, when summoned by this effect, can add a monster with 1500 defense from your deck to your hand on top of the previously mentioned effect, while Dark can add a level 3 or 4 light spellcaster from your deck to your hand on top of the other effect. The familiars also have a combo attack, so to speak, as seen in their awakening of the possessed forms, which are stronger versions of the base level Charmers and feature artwork of combination attacks between the two. These versions of the 4 main Charmers are all level 5 with 2000 attack points. The awakening of the possessed monsters all have essentially the same effect, which is that they can be special summoned from the hand or deck by sending 2 monsters on the field of the graveyard. These monsters must be 1 spellcaster and 1 level 4 lower monster of the attribute of the Charmer. Once special summoned by this effect, each one has a unique effect on top of a floating effect to add a spiritual art card or possessed spell or trap from your deck to your hand. The Fire, Water, Earth, and Wind attribute Charmers all have one last exclusive form called the Cataclysmic Charmers. These monsters are series level 4 spellcasters that are older versions of the Charmers with their familiars and their non-powered up form. They all have the same stat line of 800 attack and 1500 defense, and have the effect to tribute a monster of the corresponding attribute to special summon a monster of that attribute to your field from your hand. The last of these forms of the channelers are the final forms, so to speak, or at least their final forms up till now, which are the Link versions. These versions of the channelers are the most popular and used versions of the channeler cards, as their effects have come a long way since their flip effects. Each one is a Link 2 with both downward pointing diagonal arrows, and requires 2 monsters to be summoned, with at least one of them being of the corresponding attribute. Like with the other Charmer cards, they all have the same effect, but specific to their attribute. Their effects are that they can target a monster of their attribute in your opponent's graveyard and special summon to a zone that the charmer points to. Then, if the link summon card is destroyed in any way, you can add a monster of the same attribute with 1500 defense points or less from your deck to your hand. So despite this simple effect, they are often used against popular decks that share one attribute. The most popular of the link charmers is Dark, as a dark attribute is the most popular attribute of the game, so more likely than not, he'll find usage. It's also worth noting that each charmer has a spiritual art trap card associated with them, which all have unique effects for the cost of attributing a monster of the associated attribute. There's Miyabi, which targets cards your opponent controls and places it on top of their deck. There's Greed, which lets you draw 2 cards, but your opponent can negate it by revealing a spell card in their hand. There's Kurugane, which allows you to special summon a level 4 lower earth monster from your graveyard. There's Kurenai, which allows you to deal damage to your opponent equal to attributed monster's attack points. Hijiri, which lets you special summon a banished light monster, but like Greed, your opponent can negate it by revealing a trap card in their hand. And last, there's Aoi, which lets you discard a card from your opponent's hand of your choice. So despite the charmers only being 6 monsters, they have tons of variations and counterparts and have become quite popular. Next up we have the Evilswarm monsters, which are dark counterparts of various monsters. The Evilswarm monsters originate in the Dual Terminal arcade game alongside other archetypes like Worms, Gem Knights, Lavals, and Gustos, just to name a few. And where the Evilswarm monsters come into play is that they are corrupted versions of monsters from the Dual Terminal archetypes, corrupted by the Evilswarm virus that was released from the Steelswarm cell. There was only one exception to the Dual Terminal archetypes unaffected by the virus, which were the Vylons. Regardless, let's go through each of the Evilswarms and their counterparts. Starting with Evilswarm Azathoth, which is based off of the big bad of the first Dual Terminal arc, Worm Zero. Azathoth is a level 4 dark reptile monster with 750 attack and 1950 defense, with a flip effect to shuffle a special summon monster back into the deck. Now its counterpart, Worm Zero, is a lot more intimidating. This level 10 reptile fusion monster requires 2 or more reptile worm monsters to summon, and has the infamous question mark attack point value. This is because Worm Zero gains both attack points and certain effects depending on the amount of materials used for its summon. In terms of attack points, it gains 500 per material used, and in terms of effects, it gains these effects with certain amounts of materials. With 2 or more, you special summon a reptile monster face down from your graveyard. With 4 or more, you can remove from play a reptile monster from your graveyard to non-target send a monster out of the field to the graveyard. And last, with 6 or more, once per turn, you can draw an extra card. Next up, another boss monster of its original archetype is Evilswarm Bahamut, and its counterpart, Brionic Dragon of the Ice Barrier. Brionic is a level 6 Sea Serpent synchro monster with 2300 attack and 1400 defense that has generic materials to summon. The pre-errata version of Brionic was a menace due to its non-once per turn effect to return cards to the hand. However, this was changed to its current effect, which allows you to discard a number of cards to target the same amount of cards your opponent controls and return them to the hand. On the other hand, there's Evilswarm Bahamut, which is a rank 4 Xyz dragon monster that requires 2 elsewhere monsters to summon. With its similar stat line to Brionic at 2350 attack and 1350 defense, Bahamut can detach material to take control of one of your opponent's monsters by discarding an elsewhere monster from your hand. On the note of the Ice Barrier monsters, the other dragons of the Ice Barrier, Gungnir and Trishula, also become infected with the Evilswarm virus. Gungnir, the level 7 water attribute dragon monster, requires water materials with the effect to discard up to 2 cards to destroy 2 of your opponent's cards, turns into the rank 4 Evilswarm Ophion. This Dark Dragon Exceeds monster requires 2 level 4 Elsewhere monsters and is great for locking your opponent down. As well, it has materials, your opponent can't special summon level 5 or higher monsters. And once per turn, you can detach a material to add an infestation spell or trap from your deck to your hand. On the other hand, there's Trishula and its counterpart, Evilswarm Ouroboros. Trishula, the Dragon of the Ice Barrier, is a level 9 single monster that requires 1 tuner and 2 or more non-tuners. Once summoned, you can banish up to 1 card from your opponent's hand, field, and graveyard. Its counterpart, Evilswarm Ouroboros, is a rank 4 Xyz monster requiring 3 level 4 monsters. Ouroboros can detach material to activate one of 3 effects. The first is to detach a material to bounce a card back to the hand. The second is to send a random card from your opponent's hand to the graveyard. And the last is to banish a card from your opponent's graveyard. Next up is Evilswarm Coppelia, the level 6 Dark Machine monster, and its counterpart, Locomotion Argenyx. Coppelia has a pretty decent stat line of 2450 attack and 2050 defense, but can't be special summoned. However, its payoff is that when it leaves the field due to an opponent's card, either by effect or battle, you can target and take control of one of your opponent's face-up monsters. The inspirations are pretty apparent with its counterpart, Locomotion Argenyx, which is a level 9 machine synchro monster that has the effect that when it's synchro summoned, take control of your opponent's monster at the highest level. Pretty simple, yet effective for its time. Next up is Evilswarm Golem and its counterpart, Ally of Justice Cataster. Both monsters are Dark Attribute in level 5, but like its Evilswarm variants, they have 50 less attack points and 50 more defense, putting Golem at 2150 attack and 1250 defense, with Cataster at 2200 attack and 1200 defense. Ally of Justice Catastor was a pretty popular card for the early Synchro era, as it required generic materials and had the strong effect that if it battles a face-up non-dark monster, at the start of the damage step you can destroy the monster, making it a powerful option to remove boss monsters. On the other hand, there's Evilswarm Golem, which is a rock-type monster unlike its machine counterpart, and it can, once per turn, target a level 5 or higher non-dark monster in the field and destroy it. This effect is almost on par with Catastor, and would have been a popular option if it didn't require a tribute to bring it out. On the note of archetypal icons turned Evilswarm, there's Evilswarm Thunderbird and its counterpart Mist Valley Apex Avian. Thunderbird is a level 4 Thunder monster that has the effect that during either player's turn, when an effect is activated, you can banish Thunderbird and special summon during the next standby phase and it gains 300 attack. So, suffice to say, pretty underwhelming compared to its much stronger counterpart, Mist Valley Apex Avian, who is a level 7 winged beast with 2700 attack points that once per chain can quick effect return a Mist Valley card from the field to the hand to negate the effect of a card and destroy it. Even if Thunderbird is a lot weaker stat-wise than Avian, it was actually part of a unique deck alongside Wind-Up Rabbit in the past that saw some competitive success. Next up is one of the more popular Evilswarm cards, Evilswarm Kerrykeon and its counterpart, Constellar Rasselhage. Rasselhage is a level 2 light spellcaster monster with 900 attack and can be tributed to special summon a Constellar monster from your hand or graveyard in defense position. Its counterpart is significantly stronger, now a level 4 dark monster with 1600 attack and 1550 defense. Kerrykeon, if sent to the graveyard this turn, allows you to normal summon an Evilswarm monster with 1 less tribute. On top of that, you can banish an Evilswarm monster from your graveyard to allow Kerrykeon to gain an additional effect to normal summon an extra Evilswarm monster this turn. So essentially, Kerrykeon served as a strong extender for the Evilswarm archetype. Now the monster you've been waiting for, the iconic Evilswarm Excitonite. This was by far the most popular of the Evilswarm monsters, and it was a generic rank 4 Xyz that had a uniquely strong effect, being that once per chain during the main or your opponent's battle phase, if your opponent has more total cards in their field than in their hand, you can detach one material to destroy all other cards on the field. So essentially, it was an early version of Evenly Matched, so to speak. Now, the only drawback was that Excitonite or any of your other monsters can't deal damage for the rest of the turn. However, that was almost always worth the price. In terms of counterparts, Excitonite's is Steelswarm Roach, who is also a rank 4 Xyz monster that requires generic materials, that being 2 level 4s, and had the effect that during either player's turn, when a level 5 or higher monster would be special summoned, you can detach a material to negate the effect and destroy the card. Uniquely, there's actually a third member of this trio, that being Stellar Knight Zefraxiton. This is a level 4 light fiend with a pendulum scale 7. In terms of effects, the pendulum effect is the same as the other Zephyr archetypal effects, that being it locks into only pendulum summoning Zephyr monsters or Tellarknight monsters. Its monster effect allows you to, when normal, flip your pendulum summon, target another Zephyr or Tellarknight monster, as well as one set card your opponent controls and destroy them. Although Zefraxiton is weaker than its counterparts, it still plays a unique archetypal niche. Alright, and that's it for today's episode. If there's any other cards or archetypes you'd like to see us cover in this series, let us know in the comments down below. And also, thanks for watching.